Chinese watches have been attracting a lot of attention lately. Firstly, thanks to the tariff situation, more and more attention has been paid to the fact that many luxury watches are often largely made in whole or part in China. Secondly, upstart Chinese brands from San Martin to Atelier Wen are catching more mainstream attention alongside the big established brands, offering amazing quality for a fraction of the price of Swiss luxury brands. But this industry didn't just emerge overnight. Today, I'm in conversation with Ron Good, one of the preeminent collectors and experts of Chinese watches in the West, to give us some color and context to the history of Chinese watches. Hi, I'm Brian, the Chinese watch guy, and today I'm joined by the OG Chinese watch guy, Ron Good, and he's going to help us understand the history of Chinese watches. Ron, ni hao.
Hi, ni hao, ni hao. My Chinese, my Zhongwen is terrible, but
Oh
that's
no,
that's just the way it is.
I'm sure you're being modest. So Ron is a Canadian collector of vintage Chinese watches, and he curates the Alberta Museum of Chinese Horology. Is that correct?
That's correct in Peace River, yes.
Peace River, Alberta, Canada. He's made multiple trips to China since 2011. He's been studying the Chinese watch industry. He's met industry insiders. He's visited factories and museums in China. He's a member of the China Horologe Association. He's a chief expert for the China Watch Overseas Working Committee and an advisor for the Guangzhou Watches and Clocks Association. He's co-authored sections on modern Chinese horology for books, including for Oxford University Press. He's been called the Bethune of the watch industry. As a Canadian, most of us, I think, know about Norman Bethune.
He was a real humanitarian, and he wanted to help China, and he wanted to. Well, he was just very connected, like I think emotionally and with the country.
He's become a symbol of Sino-Canadian friendship, really,
Yes, he has.
right?
He very much has, and it- I have a lot of respect for him. And of course, when people meet me, that appellation, calling me the Bethune of the Chinese watch industry it was humbling in a way.
It's high praise, right? It's high praise.
Yeah.
Um, I think of Ron as the Jedi Master of Chinese watches. So I came across Ron on Reddit. He would come across occasionally and show these amazing vintage watches. I think sometimes you didn't leave much of a caption there. You just left us with this amazing picture. And it's just like, it just gave me this sense of mystery. Like, what is this? I need to find out more about these watches. Ron, would you say it's your mission to like spread knowledge of Chinese watches?
Well, my mission is to educate myself and share what I learn. You know, when I first started learning about Chinese watches, it was almost accidental. And I went to a forum that was called Watch You Seek because I had gotten bored with the watch I was wearing, and I was, learning about watches generally.
Yeah.
But I've found out that there was a sub forum on Chinese watches there with mostly Western people, except for a couple of people in China. And the watches were really not available in Canada. Okay, you could find them occasionally on eBay or something. And I think the first spark for me was when the vintage watches were inexpensive. Um, but they opened up this door to this history going back to the mid 1950s, where China had decided as a country to start developing a watch industry, a domestic watch industry, and especially making Chinese movements. So I'm finding that there's this long history of building quality products.
Right.
And
Yeah,
and people in the West and me didn't know really anything about it. There were a
for
few
sure.
people that had a clue.
For sure. Yeah.
So that's where I started, and it was exploring um, that led me to sellers in China because nobody really in the West had ever decided to try to purchase watches from sellers in China, and that was, I think, one of the things that I did that well, it was one of the things I did that nobody had done, and by meeting sellers in China and particularly a couple of sellers, one seller in particular, I developed a really close attachment to the country.
Right.
So then I thought, well, I've never been anywhere in the world really, except for some places in North America. I should visit the country.
Yeah.
And that's when things really opened up for me.
Yeah. And you've done that. You've been multiple times, haven't you?
Yes, and my next trip, of course, is coming up in October of this year, and
Okay.
that'll be my ninth time
Okay.
in the country.
All
Yeah.
right. So as a man with, I believe you have the largest collection of vintage Chinese watches in North America. Is
No,
no.
I used to,
Okay. All right. All right.
but I've had an impact on
Mhm.
the collectors in the West, of course, and I didn't hide how sometimes collectors keep things close to their chest,
Mhm.
and I didn't. I made a point of spreading how I was reaching the sellers and how I was purchasing the watches.
Okay. In any case, you are definitely one of the OG Chinese watch guys, I'd say, at least in my opinion. So I've asked Ron to introduce some different watches that perhaps could represent different eras of Chinese watchmaking. Do you have any
Sure.
reference?
If I could start, I think the first one to grab, um, and this is from Shanghai Watch Factory, and I'll see if this works. Um, I don't know if it focuses well. This is the Shanghai A581 or
Mhm.
581 series watch. Starting in about, I think, 1956 or 1957, they started to be produced, and it was the first general production watch in China. There's some, I think, Tianjin Seagull and Shanghai both were very early, and it's a little bit hazy which was the actual first. But Shanghai
Okay.
usually gets the
Okay.
credit, and it's
Mhm.
deserved. The A581 was a very good watch, a very
Mhm.
dependable watch. It didn't have shock proofing, the original, okay, but it was a good movement, and it was the
Mhm.
first foray from Shanghai Watch Factory. They had some earlier watches, the Heping and that Dongfeng, that uh, were sort of test watches. But the A581 was the first in general and large scale
Right.
production, and that
Mhm.
went on till about, I think, 1964 when it was superseded by the A611 and other watches. And of course, at the time in China, a watch was one of the things that go around, the things that you want in your home, and it was an accomplishment to purchase one, of course, and
Yeah.
difficult for very many people. So
Right.
it showed some real striving to have one,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And so and that was
Would you say that like
oh,
were these made in the millions, the thousands, or?
I would say millions
Oh
eventually.
wow.
They all started up with Shanghai and Seagull were basically the first, and then some others, Guangzhou Watch Factory,
Right.
and of course Liaoning Peacock. Those factories started up, but they started up with 4 or 5 people building these
Wow.
test watches and then
Mhm.
building the tooling or acquiring the tooling from other countries, so it was a real industrial growth, okay,
Right. Right.
for this to happen.
Right.
Um,
And so
so
there,
they
I
had to
believe
ramp up to that production.
there were like eight big state-owned watch companies, I think.
Originally, yes, that
Okay.
was the original plan. And then it sort
Uh,
of stepped up from there because the government's position was they wanted some area autonomy because they were worried about an incursion and what that might do to production. So they didn't want it all in one area. They wanted to have autonomous production in this province, and this province. So
right.
as Shanghai and that would have their tooling, and then that maybe their older tooling would go to a second step factory and a third step factory. But it really mirrored the industrial production or the way that China was expanding its industrial base in a number of industries. So you can
Right.
draw parallels with the growth of the Chinese watch industry, and the growth of a number of sectors in the Chinese industries.
Right. Right. So seminal watch, Shanghai A25, I believe you said
581.
581. Okay.
And just for an example, and I'll just have to look for it here. Um, this is a Seagull 51 Wuyi. 51 from May the 1st.
Yeah.
And it was that was Seagull's first general production watch.
Right. Right.
So,
It looks
I
great.
think it's wonderful to have them. And of course, things
Yeah.
develop from there, with
Yeah.
more complications, better movements,
Yeah.
as people learned.
Right. In this period, these watchmakers, were they, modeling themselves on any particular watches, any particular brands outside of China?
Well, it depends on which watch you're talking about. I
Mhm.
think Enicar was one. Okay. Um, so they were modeling on European movements to start. Okay. But it didn't stay that way. Okay. You came up with Tianjin Seagull's ST5, for example, which was a completely Chinese movement, in design and
Mhm.
execution. So as they grew and got knowledge, then of course, the Chinese standard Tongji movement was developed, and that was
Mhm.
internal. These
Right.
were Chinese designed, Chinese built. But even early on, with let's say you take the almost ubiquitous now the Chinese what's called the 1963
Right.
or
Yeah.
the Project 304 military watches. Okay, um, the tooling came from Venus in Switzerland, the original tooling,
Mhm.
but it was very quickly adapted and improved for well, more durability and ease of production and so on. So the improvements were made quite quickly, even with the European tooling.
Right. Yeah. Chinese ingenuity.
Exactly, exactly.
Right. Excellent. What else do you have for us?
Well, let's see. On early stuff, what now? These are watches that I truly love. They're called Zhongshan. The Zhongshan, this is one example of a Zhongshan movement.
Very
It was
nice.
a nine jewel movement. Now, because watches were hard to obtain and certainly hard to obtain from people that were in a lower economic grouping or just at a lower economic state, the Chinese government wanted them to have the ability to purchase Chinese watches also. And
Right.
Zhongshan put out these nine jewel watches with an SN2 movement. Some people look at it as being crude, except it has a 55-hour power reserve
Not
and
bad.
it's really accurate, okay,
Yeah.
really quite accurate movement, but it was available at a much lower price,
You're
okay.
right.
So it wasn't just the high-end factories like Shanghai or Tianjin or Guangzhou, Liaoning, it wasn't just that.
Mhm.
There was this other brand too in Zhongshan, and the Zhongshan watches are notable for their beautiful dials.
Right.
And some collectors in China collect only Zhongshan movements or Zhongshan watches because of the numbers of dials. They have, for instance, they'll have dragons on them or peacocks or
Right.
my favorite, the six pandas. And I could provide you with photographs of all
Right.
those.
Right. And you
And
have
they're
a lot of these
beautiful.
on your website, right?
Yes, yeah. My website has, well, I have now, I'm, I think somewhere in the neighborhood of 300
Wow.
watches, most
Wow.
of which are vintage.
We'll
Okay.
leave a link in the description for sure.
Sure. And I can show you other watches.